Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about the Korean Jhin build. Don't ask me why it's named Korean Jhin. I think it's because it originated on the Korean servers in TFT, but that's kind of the colloquial name for this build as a whole. It's called Korean Jhin. But essentially there are lots of variations that you can play of this build, and realistically the core of it comes down to Jhin with the sniper bonus with certain items and having like a Vanguard frontline. It's a really strong build. In certain circumstances. Before we get into it, thanks to G2A for sponsoring the channel. There's a reference link in the description below. So, let's talk about Jhin and this build as a whole. So, to begin with, the good way to build into this is by having Caitlyn being your Jhin carry holder. So, Caitlyn usually forms like the core of this early composition. And with Caitlyn, there's always a couple of good early synergies that you can work with her. Really, you always want to be looking to have the Vanguard frontline. So Vanguard is usually a really good frontline. Poppy Leona is really nice, but as soon as you find Jace, I would consider swapping one of these two out. I think that Leona is more naturally tanky than Poppy, especially outside of Candyland. So I would always make the swap of throwing in the Jace over the Leona, over the Poppy, because I think Leona is just a more natural tank in this composition. And then you're just looking for any old chrono to throw in. So Blitzcrank works perfectly fine. Twisted Fate is good. And I usually position something like this because the Blitzcrank is just going to be the enemy Blitzcrank bait. And then I just have the Caitlyn on the side, which keeps us slightly safer versus things like Kha'Zix, for instance. So that's the way that I like to build this out. And as soon as you find the Ashe, we throw the Ashe in as well. And then suddenly we're kind of like dealing with making sure we're scouting for Blitzcrank. So at this point, we're scouting for Blitzcranks. And items that we're looking for, the two absolute core items to this build are Runan's Hurricane and Deathblade. And then you're going to want a defensive item at some point down the line. I would always either recommend Quicksilver or Trapclaw in this particular build, just because it allows you to have your sniper in the corner and have no fear of being Blitzcrank hooked. I like QSS just because it's a nice, because then as soon as you get QSS, you can essentially have Caitlyn by herself over here. And then we're going to get to sort of the mid game. So obviously the ultimate positioning for snipers is to have them in either corner. But if there are lots of infiltrators like Kha'Zix's or there are lots of Blitzcranks around, then maybe it's better to sort of give up a bit of that damage in the early game and have them position something like this. I see a lot of this positioning, and basically it stops Kha'Zix's getting huge isolation bonuses on your snipers, and then the Blitzcrank is only ever going to pull your Blitzcrank or your Jace. This Blitzcrank can be anything, by the way. It can be Shen, it could be a Twisted Fate, it could be whatever, but the 2 chrono bonus is just a nice addition in the early game. So then what we're going to do is we get towards the mid game, we are eventually going to replace Leona with Wukong. And ideally, you have all these guys to 2-star when you can. And then we're going to drop the Caitlyn for the Jhin. So let's just say that Jhin has got these items. The reason that the Runan's Deathblade combo works so well is that every assist that you get is going to allow you to stack the Deathblade. So Runan's basically gives Jhin extra bolts, which essentially allows him to get more potential stacks on his Deathblade more quickly. So what's going to happen from this point forward is we're going to sort of level up to level 6 and level 7. Your front line is going to look something like this. You're going to have these guys here. I often like bringing in a random extra chrono. So Blitzcrank can usually stay around for quite some time in this particular build. And then we're going to get to the mid game. This is like level 5. Level 6, I like to add Karma. Just for the cake, just because she's going to sit there. And Karma allows you a couple of extra build paths out of this particular build. And then essentially I add anything that seems good in the mid game. So sometimes I like to add a Mordekaiser as well, because Mordekaiser, even though it doesn't really offer me extra Vanguard protection, he is an extra Dark Star, and so Dark Star will have a little bit of extra effect in the mid game. You're aiming to get to level 8, and then the overall composition is going to look something like this. So you would drop these guys, and you would bring in Thresh, and we'd bring in Kassadin. Once you've got Ashe, the earlier that you bring in the Kassadin, the better. So even at level 6, Kassadin is a really good addition because it essentially allows you to, it allows you to get the Celestial bonus, which is really important for Jhin because the healing's good. And then you have options essentially. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So at level 8, you have 2 options. Okay. Either you go for the Gangplank version. So the Gangplank version is the traditional version where you end up having Gangplank here, and then you bring on a Rumble. So essentially you bring on a Gangplank and a Rumble, right? And then Gangplank gets the other items. He gets like your AP items. You'd give him a death cap, etc. This essentially gives you team-wide CC with the Gangplank, okay? But sometimes it's not possible because of how Gangplank is contested. So the build that I often like to go as well is by using that Karma that I had in the mid-game and then just getting Xerath. So this gives me Darkstar, but also if I can get Xerath 2-star, he's super good. And if you can just get anything like a Ginsu's on him, even a Morellonomicon, these are just good items. And I also like to protect my Ashe. I can give her things like a leftover Shojins, for instance. My front line ends up looking something like this, where I just kind of split up my Wukong and my Kassadin, but my Jace is Blitzcrank bait. If there are no Blitzcranks in the game, then you don't have to worry. You can put your Jace on the front line, and then my composition ends up looking something like this. This is the one that I ran in this game, for instance. What I would say about this build is if there are enemy mech infiltrator players or enemy infiltrator players, consider not playing this, because snipers, they are so bad versus Kha'Zix because they're isolated. They are so bad versus Mech Infiltrator because you cannot reposition them effectively. So if you're playing in a game with Mech Infiltrator or Kha'Zix builds, which are quite popular right now, this build will be less effective. If you're not playing a build or you're at a stage of the game where they've already been knocked out, this build beats most other builds in the game. But it's very weak to Mech Infiltrator, and it's very weak to any kind of Infiltrator build like Kha'Zix or even Infiltrator Aurelia, for instance. So just be careful, because it's very difficult to make this work versus those types of builds. Let's dive into a game. I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm not going to go through a whole game. I'm just going to cut through the game and talk about the important decisions that I made as we went. Okay guys, what we're going to do is we're going to go through a game that I played. I went for the Caitlyn with the BF sword just because from this first carousel, I actually just think, especially in Star Cluster, Caitlyn is just such a good 2-cost. Like, she just does a lot of damage. She's actually getting nerfed at 3-star in the next patch, but these are all nerfs to Shredder in particular. They're actually not major nerfs to Caitlyn in the early game. Caitlyn as a 2-star just will automatically delete one person by getting an ultimate off. So the next bit we're going to skip to is at the end of the PvE round, where we're going to talk a little bit about the comp that I'm running. And also the items that I've got. So you can see here I've got a redemption, which is definitely worth slamming at some point. But I'm just keeping hold of it for the time being, because the redemption, I might want to use that tier and that Giant's Belt for something else. If I get a win streak based on this composition, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep that and slam the redemption when it could actually end up helping me in a game. But right now I've got the Chrono and Poppy bonus. I'm going to skip a little bit further forward to this point here, where I don't even skip any further forward. I actually sell off some units to go up to level 4 and add in the Leona, because I think this makes me really strong. Double Vanguard with Chrono in the early game, especially with Caitlyn being so strong, is super good to win streak with. And you can see by the first carousel I ended up getting a win streak with that. So at this carousel, especially on Star Cluster, you have two options. Go for an item that's going to have immediate impact, or literally just take a 2-star that you can put on the board that will be immediately good. Now, I didn't have many good item options here, so the best option that I did have was just slam the Mordekaiser. He's an extra Vanguard, he's really strong. I can just put the Mordekaiser on the front line, and he ends up being like another really beefy tank. Like, he's a 2-star Mordekaiser. It's a really, really, really good unit. And I don't mind him just having the belt and holding it for the time being, because he could be useful for me all the way through the mid game. So when you're in Star Cluster, just remember that it is worth assessing whether units are good as well as the items. If you can't get an item that's immediately impactful, then consider adding a unit that's going to help you maintain a win streak. So I end up finding the Jhin, and this is the point where I kind of think, okay, let's get rid of the Poppy, because Poppy is less impactful than the Leona. I think just as an individual tank, especially outside of any sorcerer bonuses. And I end up putting the Jhin next to my Twisted Fate to try and prevent the Kha'Zix doing too much work. And so we kind of end up maintaining our win streak because we found the Jhin really early on. So now we're going to get past the neutral round, and you can notice that I'm not actually leveling up to 6 here, despite me being on a win streak. That's because I assess the lobby, and I look at how many other people are in this lobby that are really strong, and I say, well, actually, it's quite clear that there are some Xayah players here, there's some Candyland players here. I don't have a Last Whisper, for instance, so it's going to be difficult for me to get through Vanguard players. So I decide not to level up to level 6, and just utilize the fact that I'm at 60 gold, and then use that to try and push myself through... the win streak. I do end up getting to level 6 on 3-2 naturally, but I did that through economy. So I now have 50 gold, and I'm at level 6 at a natural stage of the game as well. And you notice what I'm doing with my units here. I'm putting my snipers 1 hex in from where I'd usually put them. But the reason I'm doing that is because if there is a blitzcrank, especially at the start of the stage where it's difficult to know who you're going to play up against, if there are blitzcranks, I'm just having the Shen and the TF be blitzcrank bait for me here. So I have a Kale. I think Kale is a better unit overall than most of the forecasts by herself. So I've got the Kale here, and I noticed that there was a blitzcrank on the right-hand side when scouting around. So I decided to move my Kale over. Little did I know there was a blitzcrank on the other side of the field as well. But I think I'm probably strong enough to end up beating these guys. And you notice that I actually slammed the Redemption as well. So I put the Redemption on Leona after the second neutral round because I just needed to combine an item. And if you're on a win streak, especially if you have a tanky Vanguard frontline, a Redemption is a really, really good item to help you maintain that win streak. So on this carousel, obviously, I'm looking for anything that's going to contribute towards a Runans, for instance. Unfortunately, none of these items are particularly good, so I end up just taking the Chain Vest here, which is better than the Spat. Spat doesn't really come in very useful on this particular composition, whereas Chain Vest I can use to make red buff, I can use to make a load of things. Red buff is good with Runans, for instance. I like red buff with Runans. So you may notice that I've now put the Jace in. Jace is a core unit to this composition. If I find an Ashe, I will obviously replace the Caitlyn for the Ashe and then add in the what's it called? The Kassadin. There we go, for the Celestial bonus. And you can see Kayle is helping me win these and maintain a 100% win streak going through the second phase of the game. Snipers are just really strong. So we get through the second neutral round, or the neutral round on stage 3, and I find myself the Deathblade and Runans, which is the start of the setup that I want for Jhin. Now, we are kind of in a slightly weaker spot now because we have a 1-star Jhin, and we've given up a lot of our 2-star units, but you're seeing just how strong Jhin with Deathblade actually is. You know, even though we don't have the optimal units for my build right now, we're in a really good spot. And you can see I also brought in the Ashe and the Kassadin. I brought the Ashe and the Kassadin in because obviously they are Celestial, and Celestial with Deathblade on Jhin and Sniper is really good. I replaced the Twisted Fate for the Blitzcrank. I think Blitzcrank is just a better unit overall. And that also allows my Jhin to get his first stack really quickly, which allows him to start popping off. Unfortunately, he gets pulled by Auron, my boy Auron, playing the Ziggs build. And I eventually lose my win streak here. So there wasn't really much I could do about that in that situation. But I think I'm in a pretty good spot overall right now. And I just kind of roll down a little bit. So I roll down a little bit at level 7, just because I have so much experience invested with gold right now that I can afford to sacrifice a little bit of my economy to improve the strength of my composition. So I decide that, you know, having lost my first round, that's the indicator that people are starting to catch up with me in relative strength. So I roll down a little bit further just to try and upgrade my comp and maintain my position on the leaderboard in terms of health. And I find Jhin 2, which is a massive, massive upgrade. Jhin 2, huge improvement on the units that I had before. So we get to this next carousel. At this point, you're less, unless you're looking for a 3-star, you're less concerned about the units that are being offered to you, and you're more concerned about the items that you can get. So for me, in this particular scenario, the best case for me was going to be the Brawler's Gloves, but, you know, I end up just going for the Thresh with the chain belt, the belt. The reason I go for Thresh with the belt is because he adds Chrono. I can get rid of the I can get rid of the Mordekaiser, and I actually use this opportunity to level up to level 8 and just look for some major upgrades. And for me, Xerath is a really big upgrade, and this kind of confirms the direction that I want to go with this particular composition. The direction I'm now looking to go is not the Gangplank variation. I'm looking to go for the Xerath variation. So I'm looking to get Xerath 2 and play a 3 Dark Star sniper comp. And even though we're losing, we're not losing by much, and we're at stage 4-5 going into stage 5. We're 81 HP still left on the board. So, you know, we have plenty of breathing room. All the while through this game, I've been scouting and trying to make sure that there aren't many infiltrators around. And you can see now with the Xerath, what I've ended up doing is going on a win streak from this point forward. And I'm just utilizing my Zephyr to try and make sure I'm just blocking or knocking up some of the most important units that my enemy has. And you can see now we are losing to the Rebel builds, so we ended up losing our streak there. But we're now level 9, and we have a lot of really good units on offer. We're close to hitting a 2-star Xerath, which is a major upgrade. Obviously, this item is completely useless from Kayn. Like, Protector Spat is just really bad, but it's a bit of defense for one of my units at the front line, so I think I end up giving it to Kassadin just because the longer that Kassadin stays alive, the better. But we're just looking for upgrades now, you know, Thresh 2, Thresh 2, we're looking for Xerath 2, and then we're looking for Lulu as well, because Lulu would be a really, really nice upgrade overall. Getting Lulu 2, especially now that we're level 9, is really important. So there are a couple of ways to play this, by the way. When you are at level 9, you can either roll every turn, but if you've got a good HP, what's a really nice idea is to just kind of wait and build up an economy. Build up the economy, and then when you're in a dangerous situation, you can utilize that to roll down, because the more gold that you roll up, the more gold that you save up, the more that you're going to generate through interest, and when you get into a tricky situation, the more that you're going to have to roll down. So I'm actually attaching my Karma to Xerath just because I think that's the better option overall. And I'm just trying to make sure that I'm playing around Blitzcranks and trying to Zephyr the most important targets. I don't actually Zephyr anyone important here, but it is quite difficult to know who you're playing up against at the start of a stage, so you just got to take a guess. And you can see that I'm still losing by a very small amount to the Shredder player at this point in time. So that tells me that, I desperately need to look for my 2 stars, especially my Xerath and especially my Thresh. Those would be the major upgrades for me overall. So I'm actually positioning for worst case scenario here. My worst case scenario is someone like Auron playing the Rebels, so I'm going to end up positioning to sort of get the Zephyr on the Ziggs. But he outplayed me. He kind of knew that, and he was watching me as well. So he made the correct decision there to move his Ziggs. So that ended up me losing the round because I didn't manage to Zephyr his Ziggs, and he moved at the last moment, which was really smart of him. In terms of itemization here, the Morellos would be a major pickup for me. Morellos would be huge. I don't find the Morellos, so what I actually end up doing is going for the Xerath. Just because the Xerath gives me 2-star Xerath, and I don't have to roll for it. And 2-star Xerath is such a big upgrade to this composition. We find the 2-star Thresh as well, so now it's about populating my bench with units that can have an impact when Thresh pulls them in. So another Jhin, he's actually quite a good unit to pull in because he's a sniper and he'll benefit from that and he'll do a lot of damage. But also the Soraka, she can immediately have a heal, which is also really important. And you can see now with the Xerath 2, we're starting to actually do some really, really good damage here, and we're starting to beat out a lot of the other players, which is really good because obviously we were struggling versus some of those players previously. And now we're down to just 3 players, and so it's pretty clear that I'm going to be facing one or the 2 of them. I think that I can beat the Shredder player with the Xerath 2. So what I'm doing is I'm positioning for like worst case scenario. I actually end up trying to catch Auron's GP. I'm not that bothered about positioning my Zephyr versus this player because I feel like now with the Xerath we're in a slightly better spot to be able to do better in this matchup. Now I lose this one obviously, which isn't a good look, but I think overall, we should be able to beat the Shredder player more times than not. So now at 20 HP, now it's all going to be about positioning and kind of and sort of planning for the worst case scenario. Like I said in my video yesterday, a lot of it is just literally about planning for the worst case scenario. And my worst case scenario is usually going to be Auron. I think he's going to beat me I think Auron will essentially beat me at a higher level. Like he'll do more damage to me overall, basically. If I lose to Auron, I'm going to lose really hard. If I lose to the Shredder player, I'm usually going to lose by 1 or 2 units. So I position to try and catch Auron's GP in the Zephyr, and we actually end up catching his GP in the Zephyr, which delays his GP ultimate for a long time, which allows my snipers to get the work done, and we knock him out. So that's why I positioned my Zephyr. It was worst case scenario. If Auron beats me, that GP ultimate is going to hit me really hard, and that's probably going to wipe out my entire comp. So I positioned my Zephyr to try and catch the GP, and now I can have the 1v1 positioning where I know that I'm likely going to catch something important. And for me, the most important unit to catch is the Jarvan. If I can delay the Jarvan power spike, the Jarvan attack speed spike, actually it makes his Xayah much less useful. And you can see like we absolutely dominate him. When we catch the Jarvan, we absolutely dominate him because his Xayah does not get enough attack speed to his Xayah doesn't get enough attack speed to end up carrying the game. So what I could do here is actually sell the 2 1-star Jhins. If I were him, I'd sell the 2 1-star Jhins. And you can see that I'm actually holding my Thresh to position for the Jarvan specifically. So I, again, position for the Jarvan specifically. And, once the Jarvan's taking he only just got the standard down there. And at this point, it was basically too late, At this point, it was basically too late. We already kind of won. We already kind of won. So that's Korean Jhin. It's really strong when there's no other infiltrators in the lobby.